Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder, managing editor of the site. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you a quick favor. You could drop a like, drop a comment, hit that subscribe button. You might be listening but not subscribed, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or right here on YouTube if you're watching. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers. We'd love to eclipse that here sooner rather than later. And that 1,000th subscriber could be you. And we would give you a hearty handshake and say thank you for doing so. So
Even a pat on the shoulder.
a
We'll get
solid
wild.
pat.
We'll get wild.
So football availability this weekend, along with men's and women's basketball. But we're going to hit more so on football today. Big Ten Media Days right around the corner. Football season getting closer by the minute. So some really good stuff from a couple different football players yesterday, particularly from the two presumed QB1 and QB2 on the roster. Cade McNamara and Brendan Sullivan both speaking to the media for the first time this year. Cade for the first time in almost a year. Brendan for the first time as a Hawkeye. So some really good stuff yesterday. Adam, I'll start with you. We both shared some takeaways on the premium board for our premium subscribers, and I got that article out on Cade and a variety of things to be taken away from both of these guys. Maybe what were your one or two that's like, oh, well, yeah, if I was going to write about Cade, that's what I was going to write about. Now that you're writing about Brendan, I'm going to really make sure I hit this. Well, something like that.
Yeah. So one of my big takeaways was there was sort of an increased level of humility from McNamara, and you mentioned that in your article. But the one of the things that he said was, when you're injured, your phone goes real quiet. And I think when we talk about the ways that these guys deal with injuries, deal with the, sort of the recovery aspect of it, especially the longer recoveries from surgeries, we don't really talk enough about how isolated they can become. And, we heard this sort of from Luke Lachey when he was injured this past season too. But, it is certainly less of a group effort or less of a team effort going through that rehab and recovery than it is when you're on the field, when you're practicing with the other 21 guys in those scrimmages. And so we heard a little bit more of a grown up Cade at the press conference yesterday. And I think a lot of that had to do, and he mentioned as much, that it was sort of an adjustment of the people that are around him. And, there's a lot of different ways that you can take that, but it really just goes back to when you're not, QB1, when you're just standing on the sidelines or on crutches, and all of a sudden that spotlight and the glamour is away. Who are the people that are still there, right? Like, who are the people that are still showing up to support you? And you certainly got a better sense of his appreciation for that in that appearance than, say, for example, at last year's media day. And I'm not, trying to talk down on anything that Cade said last year at media day or anything like that, but it's certainly more of an appreciation, more of a sort of a maturation process that we got to see. And that's sort of what you would expect from somebody who's entering his fifth year of college ball. So, yeah, it was encouraging, I would say. There's still absolutely a presumption, both from him and until we hear otherwise from the coaches, that McNamara will be starting. And we haven't heard that the competition is open per se, but they also haven't necessarily shut the door on it now that Sullivan's practicing too. So I think that is a situation that bears monitoring. And certainly if it gets to the point where both of these guys understand that the job, the starting role is up for grabs and it's just one guy against another, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that turns out, because we're talking about two quarterbacks that came to Iowa because they lost QB battles with, McNamara had McCarthy at Michigan. Sullivan had Ben Bryant at Northwestern. So, someone if they're both healthy throughout the course of the season, someone is going to be QB2. And how do they manage that? How do they accept that role? You know, we heard from Brendan Sullivan that he's going to be okay with that. All right, let's see it happen. And so I think that's going to be fascinating to see how that dynamic sort of grows, matures over the course of the season. Is that sort of similar with your takeaway, Eliot?
Yes. I think what it all started with was that level of Cade's communication, and I think we've seen it from the jump with Cade, is that like this dude's just a bona fide leader, right? Like his ability to connect with people and communicate was on display yesterday. I think not that it was necessarily. I don't mean that it was for show. I think it was just him leveling with the media and being honest. And as former athletes ourselves, I went through something very minor relative to the ACL, right? Like I had oh my gosh, what was it? Tibial stress fracture my junior year of college or of high school, and missed 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I couldn't run during track season. And it's just devastating when you can't do the thing that you identify at, like that's such a big part of your identity, let alone a team sport like that when you are the quarterback and then the guy who comes in is, let's just say, not good, and the defense is unreal and it's like, oh, what could have been, right? I think all of that was evident with Cade, and I think we got a really strong understanding of what he went through, about as good of an understanding as we could, right? Like obviously 10 months of that, 10 months of rehab. And now for him to be back, and he said this is the first time he's been fully cleared as an Iowa Hawkeye to participate in whatever's going on at this moment in time. And golly, does that have to feel good for him. So just happy for him on that front, in the level that we do know Cade. But additionally, one thing that I said on, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, was we were talking about the hype video between Cade and Brendan, right? The fact that they were both in it, and that Cade almost, I can guarantee that he hated the fact that Brendan was in that video too. Hated it. I mean, and there were so many other opportunities for them to put different players in it. Like I know Xavier wasn't in it. Wampa. I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, like Kyler Fisher wasn't in it. Aaron Graves wasn't in it. Like there were opportunities to put other guys in there. And now, yesterday in our scrum with Cade, we don't have to talk about it too much, but he was asked about the dynamic between him and Brendan. And what Cade said was, I mean, we had two quarterbacks on the roster at one point in time. You got to bring in some depth. And initially, I had thought that, that was a fair answer given the situation he's in. And then I went back and I listened to it and I thought about it, and I still think it is a fair answer. Additionally, I think that he has grown up from his days at Michigan where he wouldn't even say JJ's name, right? Like he would not say JJ McCarthy. And he affectionately referred to Brendan Sullivan as Sully during that conversation. Now, do I think we're going to get a real inside look as to what the dynamic between those two actually is ever? No. I think they put on their media face. They spoke how they should have. And maybe it's different. Maybe Cade was being honest and said, I mean, and maybe he's clearing away the starting quarterback with where he's at in his health right now. But they brought Brendan Sullivan in for a reason, whether it is for depth, as he alludes to, or whether there's an actual competition or not. I that's front of mind for me. I think we have to address it. We have to talk about it. I included it in the article, which you can find on iowa.rivals.com. It is free. But there is a dynamic, and I wasn't going to be the one to ask. Like that's all I was saying. Like we've only been around for a year and a half, and I was just leave it to the vets out there that have been around and done that. But Adam, it looked like you had something you wanted to add there.
Oh, it's just one sort of quick thing that I remember hearing from Brevin Dahl, or from one of his family members, as a matter of fact. But at his signing ceremony, he had missed most of his senior season with a broken arm, and so he wasn't able to compete for most of that year. And one of the things that one of his family members said was, uh, you know, he told me he doesn't feel like himself unless he's running and moving. Like, it is such an integral part of these athletes' sense of self to be able to do this, to be able to move and be at, something close to, full health, to be at competing health at the very least. So yeah, you especially for McNamara to have basically 2 straight years of not even close to 100%, and to be, sort of sidelined when it's sort of the first time of his, probably his life. That's got to be difficult for him, and that's got to be a tough pill to swallow. So yeah, I think what we got from him yesterday was certainly evidence of some maturation on that front. How that translates into his leadership once he's, back healthy and all that. Like, he certainly, walked the right walk with us yesterday in terms of saying the right things. We'll see how that translates. Ross, we've been talking over you this entire time. Anything to add on McNamara and Sullivan?
No, I mean, I think you guys nailed it. It is, one of the biggest subplots of the off season. They're the quarterback, so that's, the biggest position. And there's uncertainty there with, Cade having two season-ending injuries the last 2 seasons. Iowa brings in Sullivan, like Eliot said, is it pure depth? Is it as actual competition for Cade? I mean, I think that's going to continue to be one of the big subplots all during training camp and all the way up to, week 1, potentially. I mean, if Cade comes out and looks great in training camp and, Ferentz is emphatic that he's the #1 QB, then obviously, that's who we're going to see in week 1. And it's not going to be a whole lot of, oh, who's the quarterback or any discussions like that. But until we get to that point, I mean, it is the discussion. I mean, when's the last time Iowa had anything approaching a legitimate quarterback debate, as it were? Do you remember? I mean,
you have to go back to I mean, I wasn't around for that, but
that was wishful thinking from Iowa fans. They wanted to make Padilla into a contender. I would go back to Rudock and Beathard, honestly.
That's it. Yeah.
Because that's the last time an incumbent quarterback essentially lost his job to a challenger. And I mean, at Iowa, under Ferentz, you have an established quarterback or someone that is identified to be the quarterback, and that's who the guy is, barring injury, and we just move forward with that. But we're entering this season, and probably Cade is that guy, but it's not a lock, I would say. And I think you guys agree with that, right?
Yeah, I would agree. It's, it was just a couple weeks ago I was saying here that I think Cade's sort of a dark horse for, at the very least, honorable mention All Big Ten at QB if his health keeps up and this offense and sort of adding the versatility, like throws to wide receivers. Like, if that's not all mirages, then, I think especially in a Big Ten that's a little bit down in terms of established stars at QB, I think that path is there for Cade, and I don't think that anything that we hear about Sullivan sort of negates any of that. And so knowing that McNamara is fully cleared for the first time in his Iowa career and is, feeling as good as he has in black and gold, I don't think any of that trajectory has changed. But we are talking about a guy with injury history, right? And so if Cade isn't giving you 12 to 14 starts or 15, or I guess it would be 16 now with the new college football playoff, if he's not starting all, up to 16 games of that, you do need somebody better than Deacon Hill was last year. And certainly Brendan Sullivan is that. And we have seen Sullivan, play well enough to at very least earn starting spots at Northwestern for a while. Maybe not permanently, obviously, but yeah, that is, I think that is going to be fascinating to see how Cade holds up, to how this, sort of competition holds up, and whether Sullivan brings himself to the point where, Ross, like you said, it's a legitimate competition. And it's plausible. It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure we're going to see it or not, but it's plausible, I would say. Eliot, do you agree?
So where I'm at with it is that Cade is the presumptive starter, right? Like I think we can all agree
Yeah.
with that.
And
And
presumably for a reason too, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a little bit of money had something to do with that investment and such, but also because of how Kirk operates. It's like once he makes a decision, that decision's made. And pair that with what Cade has accomplished prior. Whether or not that's exactly pertinent now is one thing, but I think that factors into what Kirk is thinking. So to me, at this moment in time, assuming health, I would probably consider him a lock to tell you the truth and to push back maybe a little bit, Ross. I think at the end of the day, what you want in camp and what fans should want in camp, in my opinion, and what I think should be done in camp is this is a competition. You give Brendan Sullivan every opportunity to try to earn the job. But at the end of the day, it's Cade. Like if Cade is Cade McNamara, well, the Cade McNamara we've seen before, and he is 100%, and you don't have to worry about the injury, and he's just not hurt, then he's your presumed starter. He's got the moxie a quarterback should. He looks like a quarterback should. I was talking with another media member at one point in time in the spring, and we were saying, I mean, Cade is the one that looks most like a college quarterback should out there when he was throwing the ball as compared to others. And so, in my opinion, you give Brendan Sullivan every opportunity, but it's Cade's job to lose. That's probably the best way to phrase it. That's where I'm at with that. I don't know if that is fair or you guys agree.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on that just because we rarely see Kirk Ferentz, especially with a position as important as quarterback. We rarely see him take away a guy's starting job because of injury, and certainly there's, you know, it's not difficult to make the case that Cade lost his to injury. You rarely see him take that starting job away and then like not give it back, like not give the player an opportunity to win it back. You know, but speaking of the Cade McNamara that we've seen at Iowa, let's remember, and yeah, he was not 100%, but he had a passer rating of 106.2 last year. Like he is barely competing 50% of his passes. Uh, Looked miserable against Penn State, and again, he was not 100%. We can acknowledge that, but Iowa was not competitive against Penn State last year with McNamara at QB. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how much McNamara's production comes up with, you know, a competent offensive coordinator and his, you know, and two healthy legs, and because we haven't really seen that from him yet. And so do those changes bring him, you know, to where I think he could be, closer to that potential of a, you know, honorable mention, you know, third team ish sort of all Big Ten QB? Maybe. Like that's going to be the $500,000 question with Iowa football this year.
Man, I don't think Joe Burrow would have been good against Penn State last year. like that was so out of Cade's control, and based on what we saw, I mean, Chop Robinson ate him alive. Sort of the rest of Penn State's defense, but to your point, I think I agree. Cade was not good last year. I think that's in his availability. Again, there are, I guess, I wouldn't even call them excuses, but reasons to say that he wasn't good. And it's health, one, and two, like you said, it's a different offensive coordinator this time around. Like, let's put it that way. And at the same time, it's got to be about the Jimmies and the Joes too. So what's surrounding him? And I don't know that would we say that the Jimmies and the Joes surrounding him this year are better or worse? Because the only real ones you lost are Eric All, Deontay Vines, and Nico,
Nico.
right? Ragaini, that's right. I mean, Rusty
Yeah.
Feth at left guard, but
Yeah, and I don't think that we can include Jacob Bostic, who's obviously left for A&M, but he was never a factor last year. So
never caught a pass at Iowa.
yeah, and I think the personnel is about the same as it was last year. I think a lot of these guys are going to be taking steps up, especially now that they're operating in an offense that puts them in position to succeed in a way that a lot of them were not before. We were talking with Jerry Abui at the recent availability, and I asked him, like, what are some of the differences between the two offenses? Like some differences in communication style with the two offensive coordinators, and he was trying really hard to not talk down on Brian, and I wasn't trying to get him to talk down on the erstwhile the ex offensive coordinator. That wasn't the point, but you could tell that this is well, in his words, this offense is a lot more fun, and a lot of that has to do with the versatility and the motion. But really what it comes down to is they're going to be catching passes now, and a big part of that is they've got an offensive coordinator who knows how to call plays for wide receivers, and so it's not just throwing into traffic down the sideline 25 yards away. And clearly there was a lot wrong with the way Iowa's offense was run last year, and it was perfectly evident during the Citrus Bowl when Tennessee was just running these like 5-yard curl routes and the easiest possible pitches and catches for Nico. I am not going to know how to pronounce that. I can spell it.
I got it. Iamaliava.
Iamaliava.
There it is.
Yeah, I I was going to hazard a guess, and it was going to be way off. So, yeah, but you could see how Tennessee could engineer a very easy pitch and catch game, even against that Iowa defense, even against a full strength Iowa defense secondary, you name it. They're still able to generate these 5-yard catches, and you never saw Iowa do the same for Deacon, for Cade, for whoever. Like, they're always trying to hit these guys in stride, running away from the QB. So you're not giving them this big catch radius. You're not giving the QB a big catch radius. You're not giving the receiver a big window in order to adjust to the ball or anything like that. I think we'll see a little bit more of that with Tim Lester now, and I think that's going to make a big difference, especially on these third downs. It's going to help them have more third and shorts as opposed to third and long. Like, a lot of things are going to be working better with the offense this time around. How much that translates into success, I mean, we'll see. But just sort of in terms of what sort of an offensive improvement is going to look like, if they even just add 100 yards of total offense to their game to game like that, it brings them up less than you would think in terms of the national rankings. But like, even if they were producing at Indiana's level, which was 100 yards more per game than Iowa was making, like that coupled with the Iowa defense, which should be just as good, at the very least will get them competitive against the top of their schedule. And they were just not competitive against the top opponents last year.
Okay. Ross, anything to add there?
Nah.
Okay. That's really good podcasting right there. Now,
Adam talked enough.
To revert to media availability yesterday and just some general conversation around football, one thing that I pointed out regarding the offensive line in the guys that we've been able to talk to is, well, I mean, I just think overall health is better than what it was, especially in the spring. I mean, we know Jennings Dunker missed the spring. We know Logan Jones missed the spring. We obviously know Cade McNamara missed the spring. We know Seth Anderson missed the spring, though we haven't been able to talk to Seth yet, I don't believe. At least Adam and I haven't. I'm not sure if he made an appearance and was really quick in and out or not at an immediate availability, but either way, we haven't seen him. And we know Le'Shawn missed a little bit, or he was wearing a boot at spring game, and he's wearing a boot again when we talked to him, but he should be fine. Anyway, a few guys missing. Doesn't seem like it's going to be an issue going into the fall. We've been able to talk to Jennings and Logan. They're both participating fully. Like I said, Cade participating fully. That's a very good thing, obviously. I mean, I don't think there was a ton of issues with health other than Cade last year at this time, if I remember correctly. But that's a big thing. The other thing regarding, I mentioned two offensive linemen in there, is that we got to talk to Logan Jones yesterday, who is always great. Not a ton of new information other than really talking with Jacob Gill and Cade and Brendan, which got a Jacob Gill article on the website, iowa.rivals.com, Hawkeye Beacon, you can find us. But one little nugget that Logan dropped in is right now what the offense is doing a lot of player-led stuff, whether it's 7-on-7 or he called them glorified walkthroughs. And what he mentioned is that at left guard next to him, which is, again, the only position the starting five have to replace, because he got Logan Jones at center, Connor Colby at right guard, Jennings Dunker at right tackle, and Mason Richmond at left tackle. Left guard was left open by Rusty Feth. Nick DeYoung played there last year and was not good. Can't emphasize that enough. But that spot is being taken presumably by Bo Stevens. He said he was explaining something and he mentioned Bo was right here. So he's a guy we saw a little bit of last year. I think at that guard spot, he was pretty good. He's another one of those mauler guys that they brought in, pretty big dude. But we were talking right before we hopped on mic, and I think we're all kind of on the same page. It's like, man, not that we're upset that Bo Stevens has got that left guard spot. We're kind of surprised it's not Tyler Ellsbury, just because of how good he was at center, taking over for Logan Jones last year. And then another two names we've talked about, Cade Piper and Leighton Jones, and it's Bo Stevens that gets that starting spot, presumably going into camp at least. I guess, what do you guys think about that? Were you kind of hoping it'd be Ellsbury? Were you kind of hoping for Piper or Jones, one of these new fresh faces? Where are you at with that? Because I definitely, if somebody asked me 2 days ago, who do you think should start at left guard for Iowa, I would have said Tyler Ellsbury right away. I think I was actually on Voice of College Football recently, and I didn't even mention Bo Stevens. so not, and that's just a mistake on my part, but I would definitely would have said Tyler Ellsbury and maybe a fresh face Cade Piper. He could definitely use another year of development, but I would have said Tyler Ellsbury.
Yeah, I mean, I think it did seem like Ellsbury was kind of that next man in for the interior line positions. You know, if something happened to Logan Jones, he's going to slide in at center. But if one of the guard spots is available, then, you know, yeah, it's kind of seemed like he would likely be the guy there. But I also don't think there's a ton of difference between Stevens, Ellsbury, and maybe Piper. We saw them all last year. They had their ups and downs, I think. But, you know, we don't know what they've done in the off season, and if, you know, Stevens has been healthy and, you know, he's really adjusting well to, you know, the Tim Lester offense. Maybe he has kind of, I guess, clearly it seems like he's moved ahead a little bit in that race. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Eliot. That's kind of the only interesting position to watch on the offensive line heading into training camp, because the other ones do have, you know, very established veteran returning starters. Would not really expect any of them to be displaced. So that left guard position is kind of, you know, is it up for grabs, or does Stevens, you know, how firm is his hold on it, I guess? Adam, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I'm with you guys in so far as, if we're evaluating based on how they played last year, especially toward the end of last season, then yeah, I would expect Ellsbury to be that guy at left guard. And so hearing that they're looking at Stevens, it could be, you know, one of a few things. You know, maybe Bo has gotten that fire lit under him that we know some staff members have been waiting for. You know, it might be a situation where, you know, for whatever reason, Ellsbury is, you know, practicing over the summer at a different position, or, you know, if they're trying to generate some depth there elsewhere. He might be dinged up for all we know, right? Like, I would assume that that spot in particular is very much written in pencil in terms of the depth chart. And I really don't want to put a ton of stock into what that situation is now vis-a-vis like what it's going to be come week one or week zero or what have you, or even the start of fall camp for that matter. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that shakes out. When we get to talk to Kirk, I think that is going to come up, and I don't think it's even going to be our job to bring it up, if you know what it like. I think that's going to be one of the first questions that comes up during the media day, during the Iowa media day, when we get that opportunity to talk to Kirk. But yeah, I think that is certainly fascinating to hear that Bo Stevens' name was coming up. I would love to know a little bit of context on that one, just because again, we would have expected Ellsbury, and I don't think we've heard a reason why he wouldn't be in that spot. So curious to see how that shakes out.
One thing I'll add in there is Piper is definitely the most unknown commodity, though he was a name that we talked about last year. He only did get to play one game. It was Western Michigan, Adam. Does that ring a bell? I think it was Western Michigan. I know you're looking it up, but I believe it was on that final drive where Max White got to score, and they covered because of it. I think they just kind of had their second. It was twos, go twos. Deacon, I remember Deacon being out there too at that point in time. So if I had to remember correctly, that's when Cade Piper saw some time, but he'd be the most unknown commodity between those three.
It was Rutgers.
Really?
And then he also played some garbage time in that Tennessee game, but you know, they were emptying the benches at that point. But yeah, no, it was that's what they got him for.
Oh, well.
See, I thought it was Michigan State at the end of that one, but clearly not, because that one was close. But yeah, I distinctly remember the drive that you were talking about too. But yeah, they've got him listed for Rutgers.
All right. Well, there you go. Now, on to the next topic. With media days coming up, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun here on a HawkCast and draw up a little hypothetical. Whereas Adam and I are going next week, we will get Luke Lachey, Jay Higgins, and Quinn Schulte at Big Ten Media Days, and of course, Kirk will be there as well. And this hypothetical is a scenario where if any of us got to ask Kirk Ferentz one question about the upcoming season, and the answer we got was guaranteed to be the 100% unabated, unedited truth, what would that question be? Now, each of us have had some time to come up with that question. None of us know what our questions are. And because I want to make sure neither of you steal the question that I came up with in the last about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask Kirk, Mr. Kirk Ferentz, how much free reign are you going to give Tim Lester on the offense this season? Because that's what everybody wants to know. It's that simple, right? We don't want to see the offense of yesteryear. We don't want to see the offense of the 1940s. Just kidding. That's a little dramatic. Are you going to allow your new OC to come in, run this RPO heavy scheme, run this Shanahan type offense, have a little bit of fun out there, throw a forward pass every once in a while? Are you going to take your hands off? Are you going to be the head coach? Are you going to help out with the offensive line, do those things, handle personnel, do all the things that you got to do as a head coach, NIL now, manage the port, whatever, and let Tim Lester run the show on the offense? And of course, you got to dip in from time to time as the head coach, right? But are you going to let Tim Lester run the show? That would be the question that I'd want 100% I don't want any of this wishy-washy on the head coach. No. Are you taking your hands off? And are you letting Tim Lester run that thing? Adam, what's your question? Or unless you had some commentary on that, because no, okay.
No. I mean that's that's the obvious
Okay.
question that we all want to know. I would ask, if I knew that I was going to get an honest answer, I would ask him from his perspective how that whole Caden Proctor situation went down. Because we know that Kirk does not cotton well to wishy-washy, prospects and commitments and backing out and this and that. And like we know that he still holds that grudge against Chantrell Henderson. That's been like a decade ago, if not more. And there's been some other.
That's a lot more than a decade ago, Adam. We're very old.
It was a decade tops. No. But that's how long that he's been holding on to that. He didn't mention it by name, but he left all the breadcrumbs and put a neon arrow around said breadcrumbs too. So I want to know, because we heard a little bit from other sources that that Proctor had, certainly gone on spring break with his old teammates. We had heard that the teammates had sort of checked to see if the door was still open to come back and all that. But we're talking about a brand new world of a toothless NCAA that can't stop these guys from transferring in, transferring out, like multiple times, still staying eligible, this and that. And we also know that Proctor got some amount of money from that car dealership for doing that one spot without ever being actually on the team. And so if I know that I'm getting candid Kirk, unfiltered Kirk, I would just say, walk me through the Caden Proctor timeline. Tell me what you thought about all those things, because I think it would be some real scorched earth territory, but it would be enlightening. And I think it would reflect a lot of valid frustrations that a lot of people have with the NCAA and the current state of eligibility and transfer portal and this and that. I think he would have a very illuminating answer that would just so happen to also be tremendously entertaining. Tremendously. Real popcorn stuff. But I genuinely want to know what he thinks about how all that shook out. And we know that he doesn't really want to talk about it, and I don't blame him. But if the truth serum's working, give me that. So Ross, how about you?
It's very unfair to make me go last after you asked two great questions. I do think if I had truth serum, Eliot's, that question is perfect. Everyone is dying to know what the hell is the offense going to look like? How much freedom does Tim Lester have? But you took it. That's fair. I'm kind of thinking, if I had truth serum and I could ask him one question, how close has he been to retiring in recent years? He's 68. Everything with Brian the last couple of years, that has been just a slow moving car crash, and he's obviously right there. NIL, the transfer portal, Gary Barta retires last year, his AD for the last 15 years or whatever. There's just a tremendous amount of change happening to college football, to Iowa football. And for a guy who, let's be blunt, is not doesn't handle change as well as some, he's a little stuck in his ways at times. It's a lot of change that he's dealing with. And, did he ever, seriously consider retirement? He's made more money than, just anybody in Iowa practically. And Adam, go for it.
So to that end, Eliot, you've seen it too, just in your year on the beat, but it's been a few years now where it seems like every other week, some question about his players, and it's almost always a question about his players, but some question about them gets Kirk a little emotional, and in a way that feels like he's sort of taking these sort of things in and really having a sort of that big picture appreciation that often precedes retirement, right? And so it's been, I would say it's been easy to sort of read into the way that he's been coaching, and yeah, all of the changes around him, all of them, and like big time structural changes everywhere you look. Like, is that enough? Especially like you said, 68 years old. Is that what does it? And yet he keeps showing up. He's the dean of D1, dean of the Big Ten, certainly, and it's not an accident that Iowa still retains the likes of Phil Parker and LeVar Woods, who are, frankly overqualified for their jobs at this point, but they stick around because Kirk sticks around. And so there's a very tangible benefit to Kirk's longevity, but it's also sort of becomes that sort of Damocles hanging over the program. Like, when is enough going to be enough then? And so I would love to know how close he's come. So yeah, Ross, that is a tremendous question. I'm happy taking the bronze medal on this one. These are great.
You know what else I remember specifically from last year's presser right after we got the news about Brian? Adam, I'm not sure if you'll remember this, but I even remember where I was sitting when he answered this question. Somebody asked about his future in lieu of what was happening. If he decided if he was going to, maybe this means it's the end of the road for him too. And he looked at him and said, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. And to me, that was, oh, okay, you could. Like, what are you trying to say here? And then he went on Hawk Talk like 2 days later and said the last thing I'd ever do right now is retire, or whatever he said. I'm paraphrasing, which is just classic Kirk to pluck stuff like that back on Hawk Talk when it's more controlled environment. But anyway, that was definitely a time. That was probably the first time on the beat where it was like, oh, that's the approach you're taking. Okay, that doesn't sound all that positive to me.
I mean,
I would say this. I'm a little bit surprised, and have been surprised, that Kirk lasted longer than Bluter. Like, I figured Kirk's retirement was going to come before hers. That's all. Ross, what were you going to say?
no, I agree with that. I was going to say, the counterpoint I would say is Kirk is very stubborn. He likes proving people wrong. I think he's also he likes coaching, and he doesn't maybe know what else he would do if he wasn't coaching. So those are all factors in, why does he keep coaching? The other thing I was going to say is, I think our questions were all great, but if I had one more question, I would just ask him, what does he really think of the Big Ten's expansion and adding teams from the Pac-12? Because I would almost guarantee he hates it.
Totally.
He does not want to take a road trip to Los Angeles or Seattle or Eugene in the regular season. I mean, Iowa stopped doing those non-conference games 15 years ago, and he was pretty clear about it then. So
on the other hand, if Iowa ever gets to play USC in the snow, I'm sure he would relish in the opportunity to just beat the shit out of them.
Well, that is true also. Yeah.
Just counter trap him to death. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that is 100% true.
So, Eliot, going back to what you said about the press conference and to this sort of discussion, one of the things that I distinctly remember Kirk saying is that as long as he is enjoying coaching, he's still going to do it. And I think that one came from his Hawk Talk response. Like, it wasn't I'm going to be back next year. Like, he never talks like that in those sort of absolutes, but just well, as soon as I don't like it, I'm gone, which is, again, okay, well, so that's cool. So that means you're back, right? Even though you have a brand new boss that fired your son and Caden Proctor screwed your offensive line over, and there's no way to punish him for that. And also, any other player can do that at any time now. And also, you've been mad at the referees and the updates to the blocking rules. Like, there's so many things that we know he does not like currently, and yet he still keeps showing up to work. But yeah, like, it's at some point, Iowa fans' luck is going to run out. And, I do think Iowa fans have been lucky to have Kirk Ferentz for as long as he's been in Iowa City. And obviously all the frustrations that have come along with that are valid for the most part. And he's clearly not been perfect. If he had, there'd be titles to celebrate. But by and large, it's like Iowa rolled double sixes with him, and for the second time in a row after Hayden Fry. And that is extremely lucky. And just look over in Ames for what happens when a football program does not have all-time great Hall of Fame caliber coaches running them. The lack of resources, and that's only going to heighten in this new NIL/post house ruling world, whatever that ends up being. That's only going to get magnified. And so, does Iowa become the next Iowa State, where you're really happy if you win 7 games? If Kirk Ferentz is no longer there, it's a future that I can see. So
this took a very dark turn, Adam.
I know. But all I'm saying is Iowa fans have been really lucky to have Kirk around. And I understand why they want him. I understand the frustrations, but this has been sort of a golden era of Iowa football, even though there haven't been national championships. And I just want to make sure that we're acknowledging that in this moment too.
You're muted.
Sorry, guys. It's July 17th. We're supposed to have irrational optimism right now. The podcast is not supposed to go dark. Anyway,
I think I'm seeing dark.
As we wrap up here on this episode of HawkCast, I want to let you know, if we were to hand that bottle of Truth Serum over to you, what question would you ask Kirk Ferentz? Drop that in the comments. Let us know what yours would be. Hit us up on Twitter, whatever that'll be. And also drop a like. Hit us with a comment. What else are you thinking about today's pod? What do you think about Bo Stevens taking that left guard spot? Would you have Tyler Ellsbury there? Let us know down there in the comments. And you might be watching but not subscribed. And we know that a few of you out there, regular listeners, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss an episode. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and we want to surpass that today if we can, sooner rather than later. And then if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, what have you, leave that rate and review. It helps us out a lot. Tell a friend about the pod, one of your fellow Hawkeye fans, and we'd love to have them on. If you're not a subscriber yet at iowa.rivals.com or Hawkeye Beacon, you can do that today, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. All the premium content there for you that you could ever want in terms of football recruiting, basketball recruiting, men's and women's basketball, and football. We'd love to have you over there and to join the conversation on all things Iowa Hawkeyes. My name is Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. For now, we will see you next time.